They say when a marriage ends in these mountains, it don't just die quiet, it echoes. Mine echoed all the way from Wiseville to the overlook at Laurel Fork, where I pulled the truck off the Blue Ridge Parkway one October evening in 2007 and just sat staring at the fog until the dashboard clock read past midnight. I was 29, had $43 in my wallet, and a court date I wasn't planning on keeping. That's when I noticed the little spur road half swallowed by kudzu, a set of washed-out ruts climbing straight up the ridge like something that wanted to be forgotten. I followed it because I didn't have anywhere else to go. The cabin was waiting at the end like it had been holding its breath. Board and batten side and gone silver with age, tin roof patched with license plates from 3 different decades. One window busted out and patched with a feed sack that read Purina in faded red. Door hung open just enough to show darkness inside thick as creak silt. I told myself one night and maybe 2, just till I figured out what came next. I carried in my duffel, a jug of water, a box of Little Debbie cakes, and a .38 my daddy gave me the day I turned 16. Never thought I'd need it for anything but snakes. Inside smelled like mouse piss and old grief. There was a cot with a corn shuck mattress, a dry sink with a cracked mirror, and a porch so narrow you had to turn sideways to walk it. No electricity, no plumbing, just a little 2-eye cook stove and a stack of oak splits somebody had left a season since God knows when. I built a small fire, ate 2 Swiss rolls, and slept hard for the first time in weeks. Woke up to wood smoke and birds arguing in the laurel. Felt almost peaceful. Second night, the wind came up cold off the northwest, rattling the tin like loose teeth. I was lying there half dozing when I heard it. Creak, creak, creak. Slow, steady, like a heavy man rocking in a chair that had every right to be there. Except there wasn't any chair. I'd swept that porch myself that afternoon, kicked the leaves off, seen nothing but bare boards and a rusted coffee can full of cigarette butts from the 70s. I sat up with the blanket around my shoulders and listened. The rocking kept on, patient as a heartbeat, right outside the front wall. I eased the door open with the pistol in my other hand. Nothing, just moonlight on frost and a black wall of laurel beyond. The creaking stopped the second the door moved. I stood there a long time, breath fogging, waiting for it to start again. It didn't. I went back to bed telling myself it was the tin contracting in the cold. Third morning, I found the circle. I stepped out to piss and there it was, a ring of bare footprints pressed into the frost, maybe 20 feet all told, every print facing inward toward the place where the rocking had come from. Long, narrow feet, high arches, toes splayed wide like they'd never been cramped by shoes. The circle was perfect, no beginning or end, like whoever made it had walked all night staring at that one spot on the cabin wall. I got down on my knees and looked close. The prints were deep in the middle of the heel, shallow at the toes, like the weight shifted forward, always leaning toward the house. The frost inside the circle was melted clean, as if something warm had stood there a long time. I followed the tracks best I could. They went down the slope a dozen yards, crossed a seep where skunk cabbage was already black from frost, and then just quit. No scuff, no slide, no deeper print like somebody jumped, just gone, like the ground opened up and swallowed them whole. I stood there a long minute, feeling the mountain watch me, then went back and nailed a plank across the busted window, even though the glass was long gone. That afternoon, I walked the 3 miles to the little country store at the bottom of the ridge and asked the old man behind the counter if anybody ever squatted up in the old cabins. He looked at me over his bifocals and said, "Son, some places squat you." Then he sold me a box of 38 shells and a RC Cola and wouldn't take my money for the drink. Nights got colder. I kept the fire small because I didn't have much wood, and every night the rocking came back. Same rhythm, same spot. I'd lay there rigid under the blankets listening to it count the minutes till morning. Sometimes it would pause, like the rocker was listening for me to move, then start again, slower, heavier. I started talking to it, quiet, ashamed, the way you talk to yourself when nobody else would listen. Told it about walking out on Amy without even leaving a note, about the way her face folded in on itself when I said I couldn't do it anymore. The rocket never answered, but it got closer. One dawn, I found the circle had moved up onto the porch itself, prints so close to the door I could have touched them from inside. I tried leaving, packed my duffel twice, got as far as the truck, and both times the key wouldn't turn in the ignition. Battery was fine, starter spun, but the engine wouldn't catch, like something had its hand over the carburetor telling me not yet. Second time, I just sat behind the wheel and cried like a damn child until the windows fogged. Then I walked back up the path because I didn't have any place else to go. The cabin was waiting at the end like it had been holding its breath. Board and batten side and gone silver with age, tin roof patched with license plates from 3 different decades. One window busted out and patched with a feed sack that read Purina in faded red. Door hung open just enough to show darkness inside thick as creek silk. I told myself 1 night, maybe 2, just till I figured out what came next. I carried in my duffel, a jug of water, a box of Little Debbie cakes, and the .38 my daddy gave me the day I turned 16. Never thought I'd need it for anything but snakes. Inside smelled like mouse piss and old grief. There was a cot with a corn shuck mattress, a dry sink with a cracked mirror, and a porch so narrow you had to turn sideways to walk it. No electricity, no plumbing, just a little 2-eye cook stove and a stack of oak splits somebody had left to season since God knows when. I built a small fire, ate 2 Swiss rolls, and slept hard for the first time in weeks. Woke up to wood smoke and birds arguing in the laurel. Felt almost peaceful. Second night, the wind came up cold off the northwest, rattling the tin like loose teeth. I was lying there half dozing when I heard it. Creak, creak, creak. Slow, steady, like a heavy man rocking in a chair that had every right to be there. Except there wasn't any chair. I'd swept that porch myself that afternoon, kicked the leaves off, seen nothing but bare boards and a rusted coffee can full of cigarette butts from the 70s. I sat up with the blanket around my shoulders and listened. The rocking kept on, patient as a heartbeat, right outside the front wall. I eased the door open with the pistol in my other hand. Nothing, just moonlight on frost and the black wall of laurel beyond. The creaking stopped the second the door moved. I stood there a long time, breath fogging, waiting for it to start again. It didn't. I went back to bed telling myself it was the tin contracting in the cold. Third morning, I found a circle. I stepped out to piss and there it was, a ring of bare footprints pressed into the frost, maybe 20 feet all told, every print facing inward toward the place where the rocking had come from. Long, narrow feet, high arches, toes splayed wide like they'd never been cramped by shoes. The circle was perfect, no beginning or end, like whoever made it had walked all night staring at that one spot on the cabin wall. I got down on my knees and looked close. The prints were deep in the middle of the heel, shallow at the toes, like the weight shifted forward, always leaning toward the house. The frost inside the circle was melted clean, as if something warm had stood there a long time. I followed the tracks best I could. They went down the slope a dozen yards, crossed a seep where skunk cabbage was already black from frost, and then just quit. No scuff, no slide, no deeper print like somebody jumped. Just gone, like the ground opened up and swallowed them whole. I stood there a long minute, feeling the mountain watch me. Then went back and nailed a plank across the busted window, even though the glass was long gone. That afternoon, I walked the 3 miles to the little country store at the bottom of the ridge and asked the old man behind the counter if anybody ever squatted up in the old cabins. He looked at me over his bifocals and said, "Son, some places squat you." Then he sold me a box of 38 shells and a RC Cola and wouldn't take my money for the drink. Nights got colder. I kept the fire small because I didn't have much wood, and every night the rocking came back. Same rhythm, same spot. I'd lay there rigid under the blankets listening to it count the minutes till morning. Sometimes it would pause, like the rocker was listening for me to move, then start again, slower, heavier. I started talking to it, quiet, ashamed, the way you talk to yourself when nobody else will listen. Told it about walking out on Amy without even leaving a note, about the way her face folded in on itself when I said I couldn't do it anymore. The rocking never answered, but it got closer. One dawn, I found the circle had moved up onto the porch itself, prints so close to the door I could have touched them from inside. I tried leaving, packed my duffel twice, got as far as the truck, and both times the key wouldn't turn in the ignition. Battery was fine, starter spun, but the engine wouldn't catch, like something had his hand over the carburetor telling me not yet. Second time, I just sat behind the wheel and cried like a damn child until the windows fogged. Then I walked back up the path because I didn't have any place else to go. The night it came inside was different. No wind at all, just hard cold and a moon so bright it bleached the color out of everything. I'd burned the last of the oak and was lying on the cot in my coat and boots, too tired to be scared anymore. The rocking started outside, same as always, but slower, like the person. I came up to the cabin on Rocky Knob because I had to put miles between me and the river. 23 years since Tommy Bell went under, and I still woke up tasting black water and hearing him call my name like he was right beside me in bed. Folks in Patrick County never said it to my face, but I saw it in their eyes every time I walked into the store. Coward. I let my best friend drown because the current looked stronger than I was. After Daddy died and the home place got sold for back taxes, there was nothing holding me. I found the cabin listed cheap on some old bulletin board in Warwine. Hand-hewn logs, tin roof, no power, spring out back, and a single line that stuck in my head. Good for a man who wants to be left alone. I paid a year in advance to an old woman who wouldn't meet my eyes, and she handed me a key tied with baling twine, like she was glad to be rid of it. The place sat in a pocket where the sun only reached a couple hours a day. Chestnut stumps still stood in the yard like gray tombstones, killed off before either of us was born. Inside was one big room, a loft, and a lean-to kitchen tacked on the back. Everything smelled of creosote and mouse piss, but it was honest smell. There was a dry sink with a cracked enamel basin, and above it a mirror nailed straight to the log wall. No frame, just a rectangle of silvered glass about the size of a dinner plate, hung on one 10-penny nail. The glass was old, wavy, the silver flaking at the edges, so your reflection came out rippled and sick-looking. I hated looking at it, but I hated looking at myself anywhere, so I left it be. First few weeks I kept busy the way a man does when he's trying not to think. Cut firewood till my hands bled, patched the roof where the squirrels had chewed through, scrubbed the floorboards with lye till the place smelled like a smokehouse. Nights I sat on the porch with a jar of something clear and let the dark press in close. The quiet up there is different from valley quiet. It has weight. You feel it settle on your shoulders like a wet coat. Sometimes an owl would ask its question and nothing answered back, and that was the worst part. I don't know exactly when I first noticed the mirror acting strange. I'd catch a flicker out the corner of my eye when I passed the sink, my reflection moving a hair too late or maybe too early. I put it down to the liquor and the crooked glass. Then one morning I came down from the loft, boots in my hand, and the mirror was gone. Just a nail sticking out of the log and a clean rectangle where the dust hadn't settled for decades. I stood there barefoot on the cold floor, feeling the little hairs rise on my arms. I hadn't touched it. I'd have remembered the scrape of that nail pulling free. I hunted the cabin high and low, under the cot, behind the stove, even out in the weeds. Nothing. Just that empty, pale patch staring back like the wall had grown an eye. That night the temperature dropped hard. I built the fire high and set the lantern on the table so the shadows wouldn't have anywhere to hide. I was bone-tired and half drunk, nodding in a rocker when I heard talking. Low, steady, coming from the kitchen like somebody telling a story to the dark. My own voice, rough from cigarettes and regret, saying words I never said out loud to another living soul. I just stood there on the bank, it said, calm as reading scripture, watching Tommy go under the third time. Water was muddy and fast, log jams sticking up like teeth. He looked right at me, eyes big as chestnuts, and I didn't move. Told myself the river would spit him out downstream. Told myself a lot of things. I came awake all at once, heart slamming against my ribs. The voice kept on, word for word, telling every sorry detail. How I ran home crying, how I lied to his mama and said I never saw him slip. How I carried that lie in my chest like a bullet ever since. I grabbed the lantern and stumbled toward the kitchen, sloshing coal oil, shouting at it to shut up, shut up. The room was empty, fire popping in the hearth, frost blooming on the windows, but no living thing except me. Then I looked at the wall above the dry sink. The mirror was back, hanging on its nail like it had never left. The lantern shook in my hand, throwing light across the glass, and there I was, only I wasn't. The reflection stood still when I moved, head cocked a little, mouth going steady with the story. It looked like me, down to the grease stain on my shirt and the scar through my left eyebrow from when we were 10 and tried to build a tree fort. But its eyes were wrong, flat and black and ancient, like holes somebody burned through paper. I raised the lantern higher. The thing in the mirror didn't. It just kept staring out with those dead eyes while my mouth shaped the worst day of my life. I screamed at it then, begged it to stop, and for a second the lips paused. Then they curled, not a smile exactly, more like a dog showing teeth it hasn't decided to use yet. And the voice came out louder, coming from everywhere and nowhere. You let me drown. I swung the lantern with everything I had. Glass exploded, coal oil splashed, flame whooshed up the wall and across the floor. The mirror burst into 1,000 shining pieces that rained down like ice. I beat at the fire with a blanket till my hands blistered and the smoke made me retch. When it was out, I stood in the stink of burned wool and kerosene, shaking so hard my knees knocked. I slept the rest of that night outside on the porch with the axe across my lap, too scared to go back in till the sun was full up. In daylight, the place looked almost ordinary. Charred logs, scorched floorboards, the smell of ruin. I swept the glass into a bucket and carried it a quarter mile down the ridge and flung it into a laurel hail so thick the devil himself couldn't find it. Thought that was the end. It wasn't. 3 nights later, I woke to the sound of my own voice again, low and steady, telling the story from the beginning. The kitchen was dark, but words kept coming, clear as a phonograph record. I lit the lantern with fingers that wouldn't stop trembling and crept to the doorway. The charred wall was just a wall, black and empty. But every shard I hadn't found, every sliver hiding in a crack or under the baseboard, was glowing faint like moonlight frost. And in every piece, no matter how small, I could see that same flat-eyed thing watching me, mouth moving in perfect time. I left before dawn, took nothing but the clothes on my back in the jar I hadn't finished. Drove down the mountain with the windows open so the wind would rip the sound out of my ears, but it followed me anyway. Sometimes on long hauls when the radio goes to static, I hear it clear as day. My voice telling Tommy's mama I never saw him fall in, telling the sheriff the river must have took him quick, telling myself whatever lie would let me sleep. I avoid mirrors when I can. In gas station bathrooms, I wash my hands with my eyes on the sink. But every now and then I catch a reflection I don't expect. Shined hubcap, storefront window, a puddle after rain. And there he is. Same scar, same grease-stained shirt, same dead black eyes. He never blinks anymore, just watches, patient as stone, waiting for me to get close enough to hear the rest of the story. They say if you drive the Parkway past Rocky Knob on certain nights when the fog lays thick in the hollows, you can hear breaking glass that isn't there. And sometimes, if you're fool enough to stop and listen, a voice, sounds a lot like mine, starts telling what really happened that day on the Dan River in 1998. I keep moving. I keep the radio loud and the windows cracked so the wind can't carry it inside. But I know one of these days I'll pull over. I'll walk into the trees with a flashlight and a shovel and try to find every last piece I threw away. Because maybe if I bury 'em deep enough or burn 'em hot enough, the story will finally stop. Or maybe I'll just sit down in the laurel and listen till he finishes. I still ain't decided which would be worse. I took the caretaker job because the money was steady and the silence was supposed to be part of the bargain. The owner lived in Richmond, some lawyer who only came up 3 weekends a year to shoot deer and drink single malt with his banker friends. Rest of the time, the place belonged to me. A long, low hunting lodge built of chestnut logs back when chestnuts still grew, set so deep off Thunder Ridge that the mail didn't even try. My duties were simple: keep the pipes from freezing, run the generator once a week, sweep out the mouse turds, and make sure poachers didn't gut the place for copper wire. In return, I got a roof, $500 a month cash, and nobody to answer to but a man who only ever called when the stock market made him nervous. The cabin sat at the end of a logging trace that washed out every spring. You crossed a little branch on footstones slick with moss, climbed a rise, and there it was, squatting under hemlocks so old their needles lay 3 feet deep. 8 rooms, big stone fireplace you could stand up in, and a front door thick as a church Bible. Solid oak, iron hinges, modern Yale lock the owner had installed because he didn't trust the old skeleton key anymore, and a heavy deadbolt above it. When that door was shut and locked, a man would need a cutting torch or a bad attitude to get through. I moved in the first week of November, the year Mama finally lost a fight with the cancer that started in the lungs and finished everywhere else. I'd sat beside her bed in that Roanoke hospital for 3 straight weeks, holding her hand while it went from warm to cool to cold. When they asked if I wanted a minute alone with her after, I couldn't do it. Just walked out and kept walking until I found myself on the Parkway headed west, with no plan except to outrun the smell of antiseptic and wilting carnations. The lawyer's phone call came 2 days later, like the mountain itself was offering me a hiding place. First few nights were peaceful, in the way only an empty house can be when your heart's too tired to beat proper. I'd build a fire, heat a can of beans, and sit on the porch listening to the owls trade calls across the hollow. The quiet was so complete I could hear the blood moving in my ears. I slept hard, dreamless, the kind of sleep you fall into when grief has wrung you out like a dish rag. Then came the morning I found the door standing open. I woke to pale light sliding across the puncheon floor and a cold that didn't belong inside. The fire had burned down to nothing, but that wasn't what chilled me. The front door, the one I'd watched myself lock and bolt the night before, was cracked exactly 2 inches. Not flung wide, not forced, just eased open polite, like a well-mannered guest who didn't want to startle the household. I sat up slow, skin prickling. The chain was still latched, which meant the deadbolt had been thrown back and the Yale turned from the inside. I live alone. I have always lived alone. I got up, pulled on my boots without lacing them, and walked the house room by room. Nothing moved. No muddy prints, no drawers opened, no sign anybody had been there but me. The windows were all latched from the inside, frost feathers blooming on the glass. I stepped out onto the porch. The ground was hard with frost, and the only tracks were mine from the night before when I'd carried in firewood. Whatever opened that door hadn't come from outside, and it hadn't stayed. I shut the door, worked the locks twice to be sure they caught, and told myself it was a dream or a sleepwalk. I've never walked in my sleep, not once, but a man will believe anything if it keeps the world sensible. Next morning it was open again. Same 2 inches, same polite invitation. I stood there a long time with my hand on the knob, feeling the cold breathe out around the edges. The air coming through that crack smelled of wet leaves and river stone, the smell of a grave the day you lowered a box. I recognized it the way you recognize a voice from childhood. It was the smell that had rolled out of Mama's plot when the preacher said ashes to ashes and the dirt started falling. I slammed the door hard enough to rattle the windows and threw the deadbolt so hard the key bent. Spent the day outside splitting wood until my palms blistered. Anything to keep moving. That night I sat up in the kitchen with every light burning and a pot of coffee going cold beside me. Around 3, maybe 4, I heard the softest click. The Yale turning back, slow and careful. Then the deadbolt slid home with a sound like a sigh. I walked to the door with the Remington 12 gauge in my hands and waited. Nothing else moved. When the sky finally went gray, I opened it myself. The porch was empty, the woods still asleep. No tracks but mine. It kept on like that for a week. Every single morning the door stood open the same 2 inches, no matter how many times I locked it, no matter if I sat up all night staring at the knob. I tried everything, wedged a chair under the handle, ran a chain through the hasp, even dragged a heavy pine table across the floor and braced it. Didn't matter. Come dawn, the table will be back where it started, the chain hanging loose, the door cracked open like a whispered good morning. Nothing ever taken, nothing out of place, just that quiet, courteous gap and the smell of turned earth and funeral flowers drifting through. I started talking to it, couldn't help myself. I'd lock up at night and say out loud, "Leave me be, I got nothing for you." Or, "I ain't ready, mama, please." Sometimes I'd stand on the porch after finding it open and shouting to the trees until my voice gave out. The mountains swallowed the sound and gave nothing back. On the 9th morning, I couldn't take another sunrise of it. I loaded the truck before light, planning to drive down to the lawyer's office in town and tell him to find somebody else. But the night before, something shifted. The air got heavier, like a storm was pressing down, though the sky was clear. I sat in the rocking chair facing the door with the shotgun across my knees and every lamp in the house burning bright enough to land planes. I hadn't slept in 3 days and my eyes felt full of sand. At 4:17 exactly, my daddy's old Timex stopped at that minute and never started again. I heard the knob turn. Slow, deliberate, the way Mama always opened my bedroom door when she thought I was asleep and wanted to check on me. The Yale clicked back. The deadbolt eased free. The door began to open, 1 inch, 1.5, stopping exactly where it always did. Only this time the cold that came in was thick, almost wet, and the smell hit me so hard I gagged. Turned earth, carnations left too long in the vase, the sweet rot of lilies, all of it mixed with the sharp iron smell of fresh dug clay. I was on my feet before I knew it, shotgun up, heart hammering so loud I figured whatever was out there could hear it. I reached the door in 2 strides and jerked it all the way open, ready to blow a hole through whatever waited on the other side. There was nothing, just the porch boards, silver with frost, and the dark line of trees standing quiet. No breath, no movement, no shape I could point a gun at. Only that smell, thick enough to chew, and a feeling like fingers brushing the back of my neck. I stepped over the threshold with the Remington ready, and the cold wrapped around me like river water. The frost on the porch was unbroken except for my own prints. I looked down and felt my legs go weak. Right at the edge of the door sill, pressed into the frost so clear it might have been cut with a knife, was a single bare footprint. Small, narrow, the size Mama wore when she still had feet warm enough to leave prints. It pointed into the house. I stumbled back inside, slammed the door, threw every lock I had, and dragged the kitchen table against it again. Then I sat down on the floor with my back to the wood and waited for morning. The smell didn't fade. It settled in the rafters, soaked into the quilts, clung to my skin like smoke. I cried then, great tearing sobs I didn't know I had left in me. I begged her to go back, told her I wasn't strong enough to follow yet, promised I'd be a better son if she'd just leave me this side of the dirt. Dawn came slow and pale. The door stayed shut all the way through sunrise for the first time since I'd come. I opened it myself at 7:30, half expecting her to see us standing there in a Sunday dress with graveyard dirt on the hem. Nothing but bright winter light and a red bird on the porch rail looking at me like I was the strangest thing it had ever seen. I left the keys on the table, took nothing but the clothes on my back and the shotgun I never fired. Drove down the mountain with the windows open so the wind could scour that smell out of my nose, but it followed me all the same. Still does. I hear it sometimes, late at night when the house is quiet and the locks are all turned. A soft click, patient as mercy.
the sound of a yell easing back, a deadbolt sliding home gentle so it don't wake the sleeper. I don't get up to check anymore. I just lay there in the dark with my eyes open and wait for the 2-inch gap that never quite comes, because I know what's on the other side is only being polite. And one of these mornings when I'm too tired to fight it, I reckon I'll leave the door unlatched myself, just to see if the smell is still as strong as I remember.
I took the cabin because the pictures on the listing made it look lonely in the way I needed to be lonely. A low, clapboard place built in the 30s for rich folks from Lynchburg who wanted to play at mountain living for a week or two every summer. After they quit coming, it sat empty so long the forest started leaning in, rhododendron brushing the eaves, poplar seedlings sprouting through the porch planks. The rental agent met me at the gate with a key on a rusty nail and said the power was off more than it was on. Water came from a spring, and the heat was whatever you fed the stone fireplace. 10 years since anybody stayed a full season, he told me, like that was supposed to sweeten the deal. I gave him 3 months cash up front and watched him drive away, glad to be quit of the place. First week of October, the leaves were still holding, blood red and gold, but you could feel winter crouched behind the ridge, waiting. I spent the days walking the old carriage roads, kicking through ferns tall as my waist, trying to outrun the sound of my own breathing. Nights I sat on the porch with a quilt around my shoulders and listened to the quiet pile up so thick it hurt the ears. Inside, the cabin smelled of mouse nests and cold ash. I swept it best I could, hauled in groceries and kerosene, stacked split oak by the hearth until the porch looked like a lumber yard. Told myself the hard work would keep the black dog off my back a little longer. The first frost came on a Tuesday, thin and silver, gone by the time the sun cleared Thunder Ridge. I woke early, mouth tasting like pennies, and saw the windows had fogged on the inside. Nothing strange about that in an unheated house, but when I swung my feet to the floor, I stopped cold. Across every pane, from the bedroom clear through to the front room, were handprints. Small ones, child-sized, fingers splayed wide, palms flat like they'd been trying to push straight through the glass. Dozens of them, some low where a little one might reach if they stood on tiptoe, some higher, shoulder height on a grown man. All of them facing inward, toward the bed where I'd been sleeping. I stood there in my long johns, coffee forgotten, and felt the hair rise all the way down my spine. Told myself kids had been playing in here over the years, breaking in, leaving marks that showed up when the temperature dropped. Made sense. Except the prints were on the inside, and the dust on the sills was so thick a mouse would have left tracks. I took a wet rag and scrubbed until my fingers went numb. By noon, the sun had burned the frost off, and the glass was clean again, nothing to see but my own gray face staring back. That night, I built the fire high and left every lamp burning, drank enough bourbon to quiet the buzzing under my skin, and fell asleep still dressed, boots on the hearth rug. Woke before dawn to the sound of the house cracking with cold. The fire had burned down to a few red eyes. I sat up, heart already running, and looked at the windows. The prints were back, sharper this time, edges crisp as if they'd been cut with a knife, and higher. Some of them now reached nearly to the top of the lower sash, like whatever made them had grown 4 or 5 inches overnight. I got up and walked the room slow, shining the flashlight over every pane. The prints overlapped in places, frantic, as though a whole passel of youngins had been clawing to get in or to get at me. I opened the front door and stepped out barefoot into the frost. The porch boards burned my soles. Around the cabin, the ground was white and unmarked, except for my own tracks coming in the day before. Nothing else. No tire marks, no boot prints, no drag marks from a ladder. Just my lone set leading up the steps and stopping at the threshold. I didn't sleep again that night. Sat in the rocker with the 12 gauge across my knees and watched the windows until the sun came up and melted the evidence away. Spent the day doing busy work, splitting kindling till my shoulders screamed, hauling water, anything to keep moving. Kept telling myself it was condensation, tricks of the light, some explainable thing. But the feeling had settled in my gut like a stone.
Something knew I was here, and it was measuring how long it would take to reach me. The third night, the temperature dropped hard. I woke to find my breath hanging in the air like smoke. The fire was out, though I'd banked it careful. The room felt wrong, too still, the kind of stillness that comes before a tornado touches down. I clicked on the Coleman lantern and swung it slow. The lower windows were covered again, prints crowded so thick you couldn't see glass between them. But now there were prints on the upper sashes too, tiny fingers stretching down from the very top of the frame, as if the thing or things had climbed the outside wall like spiders. Some of the prints were smeared, like whatever made them had slipped and caught itself on the way down. I don't mind telling you, I cried then, quiet, ashamed, the way a man cries when he's alone and scared half to death. I talked out loud to the empty room, asked what they wanted, told them I didn't have anything to give, begged them to leave me be. My voice sounded small and cracked, swallowed up by the log walls. The only answer was the soft pop of ice forming in the water bucket. Fourth night, I didn't even try to sleep. I moved the mattress into the middle of the room, far from every wall, and sat up with the shotgun and every lantern blazing. Kept the fire roaring until the hearthstones glowed. Outside, the wind came up and moaned around the eaves like a living thing. Sometime after midnight, the lamps started to dim, one by one, even though the mantles were new and the tanks full. The fire settled lower no matter how much wood I fed it. The cold crept in slow, patient. My fingers went stiff on the shotgun stock. Then I heard it, scratching. Light at first, like squirrels in the walls, then harder, deliberate, coming from every direction at once. I swung the lantern and saw frost blooming across the ceiling logs, white feathers spreading fast, thick as January on a graveyard stone. The handprints started appearing above me while I watched. They came out of nothing, no window, no surface that could hold frost yet, just pale, perfect prints pushing down through the bloom like something on the other side of the roof was pressing with all its weight. First one set, small, fingers no longer than matchsticks, then another beside it, bigger, then more, overlapping, reaching, until the whole ceiling looked like the inside of a coffin lid hammered by desperate hands. I could see the prints flex, the way fingers do when a child is straining on tiptoe. The scratching got inside my skull. I screamed at them to stop, racked the shotgun, fired into the roof until the barrel glowed, and plaster rained down like dirty snow. The echo rolled through the hollow like thunder, and for one blessed minute, everything went quiet. Then the prints kept coming. I don't remember packing. I don't remember starting the truck or the drive down the mountain. I came to myself halfway to Bedford with the heater blasting and blood running down my cheek from where I'd clawed it open without noticing. The cabin key was still in my pocket, frozen stiff. I threw it out the window somewhere near the Parkway and never looked back. That was 8 years ago. I live in a brick ranch house now with storm windows and a security system that chirps when you open a door. I keep the heat set at 75 even in summer. People think I'm crazy for the electric bill. They don't know that some winters, when the first real cold snaps down off the peaks, I wake up to find frost on the inside of my bedroom ceiling. Just a little patch at first, right over the bed. And if I lie real still and stare long enough, the prints start to show. Small ones, reaching down through the ice that shouldn't be there. I sleep with the lights on now, every light in the house, and I keep a crowbar by the bed, though I know it won't do a lick of good. Because whatever's up there in that cabin never finished growing. And some nights when the wind shifts north, I swear I can feel the ceiling flex above me, just a little, like something testing how much weight these new rafters can hold before it pushes all the way through.
They told me the cabin on the backside of Apple Orchard Mountain had been empty since the chestnut trees died, and that suited me fine. I'd buried my daddy the week before, stood in the cemetery while the preacher read from a Bible older than the county itself, and felt nothing but a cold, flat nothing. The house in Floyd felt too big after he was gone. Every creak reminded me of his boots in the hallway, every corner holding the smell of his Prince Albert tobacco. I needed distance, needed the kind of quiet that don't ask questions. So I loaded the truck with a cot, a camp stove, and a bottle of Old Granddad and drove up the Forest Service Road until the pavement quit and the gravel quit, and all that was left was 2 ruts climbing the mountain like scars. The cabin sat in a little punch bowl hollow where the sun only hit a couple of hours a day. Plank walls black with age, tin roof rusted the color of dried blood, and not a single window cut into the sides. Just a rough door hung on leather hinges, and inside, one big room with a stone hearth gone cold years ago. From the center beam hung a coal oil lamp, old Aladdin with a green glass shade and a chimney so clean it looked brand new. The wick was trimmed neat, the font still held a finger of clear oil. Somebody had been keeping house, or wanted me to think so. I laughed when I saw it, a short bark that echoed wrong in that windowless box, then set my cot up under the beam and told myself I'd be gone in a week. First night I drank enough to blur the edges and fell asleep with my boots on. Woke up sometime past midnight needing to piss. The cabin was black as the inside of a coal mine, but the lamp was burning. Soft yellow light sliding across the walls, throwing long shadows from the few things I'd brought. My duffel, the camp chair, the empty bottle on the floor. The flames stood straight and steady, no flicker at all, like there wasn't a breath of air in the place. I sat up slow, heart kicking once hard. I knew I hadn't lit it. I'd have remembered the smell of kerosene, the scratch of a match. But there it was, glowing like it belonged there. I got up, bare feet cold on the punching floor, and walked over. The globe was warm, almost hot. I turned the little brass wheel and blew the flame out. The darkness that came after felt heavier than before, like it was glad to be back. I stood there a long minute listening to the mountain settle, then crawled back under the blanket and told myself it was a draft or a trick of memory. Grief does that, makes you doubt what your own hands done 5 minutes ago. Next night I didn't drink. I sat on a cot with the .38 in my lap and watched the dark. Around 2, maybe 3, the wick caught by itself. No scrape of a match, no hiss of sulfur, just a little pop and the flame was there, taller than it had any right to be. The light didn't spread like it should. It stayed in a column, straight up from the burner, and then the whole lamp lifted off its hook and drifted toward the northeast corner where the floorboards were darkest. It moved slow, the way an old man moves when his knees are full of rust, hovering maybe 4 feet off the ground. I could hear the faint slosh of oil inside the font, steady as a heartbeat. I told it to stop. My voice cracked like a kid. The lamp paused, turned a few inches like somebody was deciding, then kept going until it stood over the spot where the planks had warped and cupped. It stayed there the rest of the night, burning quiet, throwing my shadow up the wall behind me. Only the shadow had wings, great wide things that stretched corner to corner. I sat frozen, afraid to breathe too loud, afraid the light would notice I was still awake. When the sky outside started going great, the flame shrank to a teardrop, sighed, and went out. The lamp settled back on its hook like it had never moved. The globe was so hot I couldn't touch it without blistering my fingers. I spent that day walking the ridge, trying to outrun the feeling that something in that cabin had measured me while I slept. The forest up there is thick, poplar and hemlock and laurel so old it'll swallow a grown man in 10 steps. I found the remnants of an old apple orchard gone wild, trees twisted and hollow, fruit the size of walnuts hanging black from the branches. Somewhere a raven followed me for half a mile, croaking like it knew my name. By the time I got back to the cabin, the sun was already sliding off the mountain, and the hollow felt colder than it had any right to in August. I didn't want to go inside. I stood on the doorstep a long time, telling myself I could sleep in the truck. But the truck was a mile back down the trace, and the idea of walking that rutted road in the dark turned my stomach worse than the cabin did. So I went in, barred the door with the old ironwood stick somebody whittled for that purpose, and sat with my back to the wall and the pistol across my knees. The lamp lit itself before full dark this time.
It rose off the hook with a soft clink and floated straight toward me. No bobbing, no swaying, just a steady drift like it knew exactly where I was. I raised the revolver and told it to stay back. The hammer clicking sounded loud enough to wake the dead, but the light kept coming. When it was 3 feet away, it stopped, hanging in the air at chest height, flame burning clean and yellow. The heat coming off the globe felt like standing too close to a stove. I could see my reflection in the curve of the glass, eyes wide, mouth trembling, looking every bit the coward I was. Hours passed, I don't know how many. My arms went numb holding the gun, but I didn't lower it. The lamp never wavered. Sometimes the flame leaned a little one way or another, like whoever carried it was shifting weight from foot to foot. I started talking, quiet at first, then louder. Told about Daddy dying in the hospital bed that smelled like bleach and piss. Told it how I hadn't cried once, not even when they pulled the sheet over his face. Told it I was sorry I'd been a disappointment, sorry I'd sold the home place piece by piece to pay his bills, sorry I'd let him go into the ground owing the funeral home $2,000 I'd never have. The lamp just burned, patient as stone. Toward morning, the oil started to give out. The flame shrank, turned blue at the edges, and the light got dimmer and dimmer until the shadows folded back in. But before it died, the lamp moved again, slow, deliberate, until it hovered right over my cot. The heat soaked through the blanket, through my shirt, until I felt it on my chest like a hand. I smelled coal oil and something else underneath, ozone maybe, or the sharp smell you get when lightning's been close. I closed my eyes. I don't know why. Maybe I was tired of being afraid. When I opened them again, the flame was gone. Dawn was leaking through the chinks in the walls, thin and gray. The lamp hung from its hook again, globe cool now, font empty. I sat there till the sun came full up, then walked outside on legs that didn't want to hold me. The clearing was empty. No tracks in the soft dirt, no smell of kerosene on the wind. Nothing to prove any of it happened, except the blisters on my fingertips and the perfect circle burned into the blanket where the lamp had hovered. I left that same day, threw everything in the truck and drove down the mountain without looking back. But I kept the burns on my fingers. Never had them looked at, never put anything on them. They healed slow, left pale rings I still carry. Some nights when the wind comes off Apple Orchard Mountain and the house gets too quiet, I smell coal oil. Just a whiff, gone as soon as I notice it. And sometimes when I'm half asleep, I feel that warmth on my chest again, steady and patient, waiting for me to finish whatever conversation we started. I ain't been back up there. Don't reckon I ever will. But I left the lamp hanging, wick trimmed and globe clean, just the way I found it. In case whoever it belongs to comes home.
They say grief will holler you out slower than any knife, and I reckon they're right. When Ellie went into the ground, I stopped answering the phone, stopped shaving, stopped pretending I could keep living in that little house in Staunton where every corner still smelled like her strawberry shampoo. Folks meant well, but their tasserows and their she's in a better place talk just made the hole wider. One morning I threw a duffel in the truck and drove west until the roads narrowed and the cell service died, up toward the Blue Ridge where the hollers swallow sound. Found a one-room cabin for rent off the Humpback Rocks loop. Cash only, no questions, the kind of place that hadn't changed since the CCC boys built it in the 30s. The owner handed me a rusty key and said, "Mind the quiet," like that was some kind of joke. First day I did nothing but sit on the porch and watch the fog crawl between the pines. The air smelt like wet leaves and iron. I drank enough bourbon to kill the ache behind my eyes and fell asleep in the rocker with my boots still on. Woke up colder than I'd ever been, the kind of cold that gets inside the marrow. Stumbled in, fed the wood stove, and passed out on the cot. That was night 1. Night 2 was when she came back. I'd been dreaming about the wreck again, metal folding like paper, Ellie's small hand reaching for mine through the windshield, the way the rain sounded on the roof of the ambulance. I jerked awake with my heart hammering so hard I thought it'd crack a rib. The stove had burned down to embers, and the cabin was blacker than the inside of a coffin. Then I heard it, a low, sweet humming drifting in through the gaps around the door. 3 notes up, 3 notes down, pause, repeat. The little nonsense lullaby Ellie made up when she was 6 and scared of storms. She'd sing it under the kitchen table with a flashlight while thunder shook the windows. I hadn't heard it since the night before the accident, when she crawled into my bed because the lightning kept her awake and sang it against my shoulder until we both fell asleep. I sat up slow, scared to even breathe. The humming kept on, soft as moth wings. It wasn't coming from inside the cabin. It was outside, moving along the porch boards, pausing like whoever made it was listening for me to answer. My skin prickled so hard it hurt. I told myself it was a neighbor, some woman who happened to know the same tune. Had to be. But there were no neighbors. The closest house was 4 miles down a washed-out logging road, and nobody up here sings to the dark. I eased out of bed, bare feet on freezing pine planks, and cracked the door. The humming got clearer, brighter, the way Ellie's voice always did when she was happy. Moonlight spilled across the clearing, and the trees stood like tall witnesses. Nothing moved. Then the sound shifted, started drifting away, down the slope behind the cabin, where the mountain laurel grows so thick you can't see your own hand in front of your face. I stood there in nothing but boxers and an old army t-shirt, shivering, telling myself to shut the door and go back to bed. Grief plays tricks. That's all this was, a trick. But the humming kept going, calling me the way it used to call me when we were kids and she'd hide in the woods behind Mama's house. "Come find me, Danny," she'd sing, and I always did. Always. I stepped off the porch before I knew I meant to. The ground was sharp with frost and last year's chestnut burrs, but I barely felt it. The tune pulled me like a fishhook behind the sternum. I followed it down the deer path that disappears into the laurel hell, pushing through branches that snatched at my arms and left red lines across my skin. The cold burned my lungs. My toes went numb. Didn't matter. She was singing. My little sister was singing, and I had to reach her. The humming never hurried. It floated just far enough ahead that I could keep it in my ears, close enough that I thought if I walked a little faster, I'd see her yellow nightgown flickering between the trunks. Rhododendrons slapped my face. Once I stepped in a hole and went down hard, knee twisting, blood running warm down my shin. I got up and kept going. The forest got older the deeper I went. Trees so big around 3 men couldn't link arms, moss thick as carpet, air so still it felt like the mountain was holding its breath. I don't know how long I walked, an hour, maybe more. The moon slid west and the shadows changed shape. My teeth started chattering so hard I bit my tongue and tasted iron. Then the laurel opened up the way it sometimes does without warning, and I stumbled into a clearing I'd never seen on any map. It was maybe 30 feet across, ringed by laurel so dense it looked like a wall. The ground was bare red dirt, smooth as if somebody swept it every day. In the center stood a woman. She had her back to me. Long black hair hanging straight down past her waist, shiny the way Ellie's got when she brushed it 100 strokes before bed. She wore a pale dress, old-fashioned, like something from a tintype. And she was rocking side to side, slow, the way Mama used to rock Ellie when the nightmares came. The humming poured out of her, sweet and clear, Ellie's voice exactly. Every off-key twist, every breathy catch I'd teased her about for 15 years. I took one step into the clearing, and the sound stopped dead. The silence hit me like a slap. Even the crickets had quit. My pulse thudded in my ears. I opened my mouth to say her name, and nothing came out but a croak. The woman turned around. There was no face.
Where eyes and nose and mouth should have been was just skin, smooth, pale, unbroken, like a river stone. No seams, no hollows, nothing. The humming started again, louder now, coming from that blank stretch of flesh in my sister's little girl voice. It filled declaring until the trees themselves seemed to thrum with it. I backed up so fast I tripped and sat down hard. The thing, she, tilted its head the way Ellie did when she was trying to figure out if I was mad at her. Then it took a step toward me, bare feet silent on the dirt, long hair swaying like pondweed. I scrambled up and ran. Branches tore my skin. I lost one toenail somewhere and felt a warm pulse of blood between my toes, but I didn't stop. The humming treaced me, sometimes close, sometimes far away, always Ellie's voice. I fell down ravines, clawed my way back up, sobbed her name until my throat bled. At some point the moon set and the dark turned absolute. I ran blind, arms out, smashing into trunks until I slammed into something hard and flat, the back wall of the cabin. I don't remember getting inside. Just woke up on the floor at dawn with the stove cold and the door standing wide open. My feet were black with dirt and blood, legs striped with scratches deep enough I still carried the scars. I couldn't stand for 2 days, burned with fever, saw her blank face every time I closed my eyes. When I finally limped back down the mountain, I asked the old boy who rented me the place if anybody ever missing up that way. He looked at me a long time, chewing on nothing, then said, "Some songs ain't meant to follow, son, especially not ones that know your name." I left the key on the table and never went back. But sometimes when the wind comes down off the ridge just right, I hear it again. 3 notes up, 3 notes down, pause, repeat. And I know she's still out there in the laurel, rocking side to side, waiting for me to come find her, like I always used to.
The winter of '09 came in early and mean, the kind that kills old men in they sleep and makes the mountains look like they holding a grudge. I'd been laid off from the sawmill in Buena Vista the day after Thanksgiving, and the landlord in Lexington changed the locks while I was still at the unemployment office. I had $300, a half tank of gas, and a '96 Ranger, and no people left who wanted me on their couch. That's when I remembered the stone and log cabin my cousin Travis used to brag about. Said his granddaddy built it in the '30s up near Raven's Roost, back when the Park Service was still buying out the high farms. Ain't on no map, he told me once over a game of barre, and the rangers don't even know it's there. He gave me directions that sounded half like a joke and half like a dare. I took them anyway. The road quit being a road about 2 miles past the last mailbox. After that, it was just 2 ruts full of ice and a tunnel of laurel so thick the headlights barely reached the trees. I left the truck where the ruts pinched shut and walked the last half mile with my pack and a 5-gallon can of kerosene on my shoulder. Snow was already ankle deep and falling steady, big flakes that swallowed sound. The cabin sat in a little saddle where the wind couldn't decide which way to blow. 1 story, stone up to the eaves, logs above that, chimney built from river rock the size of wash tubs. Door was rough plank with a wooden latch strung on rawhide, no lock. I figured that was a good sign or a bad one and couldn't decide which. Inside smelled like cold iron and mouse nests. 1 big room with a sleeping loft, a hearth you could roast a hog in, and a single window so filmed with frost I couldn't see out. The floor was puncheon pine gone black with age, wide enough that the cracks looked like creek beds. I swept out the worst of the mess, found a stack of split oak somebody left under a tarp, and got a fire going before the feeling came all the way back into my fingers. That first night I slept hard, wrapped in every coat I owned, and woke up warm for the first time in weeks. The breathing started the second night. I'd built the fire up good and was sitting on the hearth log with a bowl of beans when I felt it. A slow pull of cold air rolling down the chimney like smoke in reverse. It wasn't wind. Wind comes in gusts and argues. This was steady, patient,
the way a big animal draws air across its tongue to taste what's in the room. I watched the flames bow inward, then flare back when the pull let go. I told myself it was downdraft, climbed up to check the flue, found nothing but stars through the top of the chimney. I banked the fire and went to bed figuring mountains do strange things with air. By the fourth night, I knew better. I'd fall asleep and wake a couple hours later to the same slow inhale. The coals would sink, the room would cool 10 degrees in a heartbeat, and I'd feel that pull right down the back of my neck. Then the exhale, warm, damp, smelling of leaf mold and wet stone, would push out through every crack in the walls and be gone. I started timing it with my watch. 45 seconds in, 45 out. Same as a man sleeping deep. I wasn't. The sixth night, the rhythm changed. I was lying on the bunk staring at the rafters when the inhale started again, slow and familiar. Only this time it didn't stop when it matched the usual depth. It kept drawing, deeper, longer, like the cabin had decided it was starving. The fire bowed so far inward the flames licked the back wall. My ears popped. The blanket on my chest pulled tight, then tighter, like a giant hand was pressing the air out of me. I sucked in what I could and realized I was breathing with it. Inhale when it inhaled, exhale when it let go. Perfect lockstep. I tried to sit up and couldn't. The pressure pinned me, gentle but sure. The smell that came down the chimney then wasn't just leaves and stone anymore. It was breath, living breath, thick with iron and old blood. I don't know how long we stayed coupled like that. Long enough for the fire to drown itself in its own ash. Long enough for frost to crawl across the inside walls. When the exhale finally came, it was warm and wet and tasted like the inside of something's mouth. I rolled off the bunk gagging, scrabbled for the kerosene lantern, got it lit with fingers that wouldn't work right. The room looked wrong. The stone walls had bellied inward a good 6 inches, mortar popping soft like knuckles, logs above them bowled the same way. The whole cabin had drawn itself tight around me, the way lungs pull in before a scream. I yanked my boots on, half-laced, grabbed a coat and hit the door. The latch string was sucked from my hand. The door slammed open against the wall and snow poured in like somebody had upended a bucket of it. I ran. Didn't look back till I was 20 yards down the slope, and when I did, the cabin was exhaling, one long sigh that rattled the tin on the roof and sent a cloud of snow off the eaves. The walls eased back to straight while I watched, stones settling with a sound like old bones finding their place again. The chimney gave a final wet cough and went quiet. I slept in the truck that night with the engine idling and the heater on high. Next morning, the cabin looked normal, just another old house holding off the snow. I went in long enough to get my pack and the rest of the kerosene, and I left the door standing open behind me like an apology that wouldn't be accepted. Drove down the mountain with the windows fogged and my chest still trying to breathe in time with something miles behind me. I see that place sometimes when the weather's wrong, fog thick enough to hide the guardrails, snow coming sideways. The ranger's temperature gauge will drop 5 degrees all at once, and the cab will fill with that same smell of leaves and iron. I'll feel the seatbelt pull tight across my ribs, gentle but firm, like a reminder. I always roll the window down no matter how cold it is, suck cold air till my lungs burn, just to prove I still can. Because some nights, when the house is quiet and everybody else is asleep, I wake up knowing the inhale is starting again. I lie there counting, 45 seconds in, 45 out, and pray the mountains are full this time, that whatever lives under the stones and logs has already drawn everything it needs from the world and won't come looking for the one breath it still remembers by name. So far, the prayers worked. So far.
People in my family always did talk crooked about the high places, my Uncle Dale especially. He'd sit on the porch of his trailer in Fancy Gap, chewing red man till his beard looked like it was bleeding rust, and tell me the old hunting cabin up near Cumberland Knob didn't belong to us so much as we belonged to it. Said his granddaddy built it in 1937 with a mule and a crosscut saw. But the quiet folk had been walking those ridges since the Cherokee were pushed out, and probably before. "They don't bother you if you don't stare," he'd say, eyes red from whatever was in his mason jar. "And whatever you do, boy, don't let 'em inside after the sun drops." I was 25, out of work when the textile plant in Gallic shut down, and I figured a drunk old man's ghost stories were the least of my worries. I took the key on his rusty piece of baling wire and promised I'd keep the chimney clean. The cabin was a hard mile off the Parkway, down a trace that hadn't seen gravel since Truman. You parked at a pull-off half hid by rhododendron and followed a footpath so steep you used roots for stairs. The building itself was low and mean, hand-hewn oak tarred black at the corners, tin roof gone soft with rust. One door, two windows no bigger than pie plates, and a stone hearth big enough to stand in. Inside smelled like wood smoke and wet dog, even though nobody had burned a fire in years. There was a plank table, two ladder-back chairs, and a single bunk with a corn-shuck mattress that crackled when you laid on it. I dropped my pack, opened the shutters to let the light in, and told myself it was home for a while. First few days were pure mountain balm. I fished the little branch that ran below the cabin, pulled out native brookies no longer than my hand, fried them in bacon grease, and ate on the doorstep watching the sun bleed out behind Fisher Peak. The quiet was so complete you could hear a squirrel cut a hickory nut 2 hollers over. At dusk, the woods went soft, shadows pooling under the laurel like spilled ink. I never saw anything that didn't belong, just deer moving quiet, a barred owl asking his question. I laughed at Uncle Dale under my breath and slept with the door unlatched because the nights were warm. Then, the watching started. It was maybe the 5th evening. I'd stayed out later than I meant, casting till the light was gone from the water. When I climbed the last rise to the cabin, something made me stop dead. Pale shapes stood just inside the tree line, maybe 6 or 7, tall and thin like saplings that never saw sun. They didn't move when my flashlight beam hit them, didn't blink, just stood there with their arms hanging loose and their faces turned my way. I told myself they were stumps, tricks of the half-dark, and walked the last 50 yards trying to keep my eyes on the ground. When I looked up again, the trees were empty. I latched the door that night for the first time. Next day I found the first sign they'd been closer. The 2 chairs that had faced each other across the table were turned clean around, backs to the room, staring at the log wall like children sent to the corner. The table itself sat crooked, one leg off its mark. I laughed it off, wind, maybe a bear, set everything right, and went about my chores. That evening they were back in the trees, same number, same stillness. I refused to look long enough to be sure they were people, just kept my eyes on my boots and the path and the latch when I got inside. The 3rd time I came home from fishing, the cabin door stood open a hand's breadth. I never left it that way. Inside, every stick of furniture faced the walls again. Chairs, table, even the bunk turned sideways so the headboard pressed against the logs. My tin coffee cup sat dead center of the floor, full to the brim with creek water that hadn't been there that morning. Floating on top was one long black hair, thick as fishing line, curled like it had come from somebody's head still growing. I poured the water out slow, watching that hair cling to the rim like it didn't want to leave. My own hair's brown and thin. That thing was midnight and strong. I slept with the 30-30 across my chest that night, hammer on an empty chamber so I wouldn't shoot myself twitching in a dream. Didn't sleep much. Around 2, maybe 3, the latch lifted soft as a woman's hand. The door eased open on its leather hinges, and the cold rolled in like somebody opened a freezer. I sat up slow, working a rifle forward. Moonlight cut through the open door and laid a white road across the floor. They were inside. 7 of them, maybe more. Tall, pale, naked, but not in a way that made you think of skin, more like river stones wore smooth. No clothes, no hair on their heads, eyes black and shineless. They stood between me and the door, not crowding, just filling the room with their stillness.
Didn't speak, didn't blink, didn't seem to breathe. Just watched me, the way you watch a candle burn down to see if it'll take the table with it. The air smelled like wet clay in the inside of a well. I sat froze, finger on the trigger, waiting for them to move or threaten or do anything a body could understand. They never did. The candle on the table guttered and went out. Darkness swallowed everything, but they're watching. I don't know how long we stayed like that. Felt like years. When the first gray started leaking through the chinks, they turned, all at once, smooth as water, and walked out the door without a sound. I heard their bare feet on the puncheons, soft as moth wings, then nothing. I waited till full daylight before I moved. The furniture was turned again, every piece facing the spot where I had sat with the rifle. My coffee cup was back on the table, full again, the same black hair, floating like it had never been poured out. I left that morning, didn't pack, didn't latch the door, just walked down the trace with the rifle in one hand and the truck key cutting into my palm. Drove till the tank was spitting air and I was 2 counties away. Uncle Dale wouldn't take my calls for a week. When he finally did, he only said, "Told you not to stare, boy," and hung up. I still see him sometimes, not in dreams, but in the edges of things. Standing just past the street light when I take the trash out. Lined up inside the tree line when I drive the parkway at dusk. Always the same distance, always the same watching. They never come closer now, but they never leave either. And every time I pass a cabin with the door standing open a crack, I smell wet clay and feel the weight of eyes that don't need to blink. Some debts you don't pay off by running. You just carry 'em quiet, like a mouthful of creek water you're not allowed to swallow or spit.
The summer of '99 was the hottest anybody could remember, the kind of heat that makes the mountains sweat and the creeks shrink to crack mud. I was 19, fresh out of high school with no money and no plan, when my Uncle Vernon told me about a little 2-room cabin up near Groundhog Mountain that belonged to his wife's people. Said it had been empty since the old woman who lived there passed in '62 and nobody in the family wanted the drive. I could stay as long as I kept the snakes out and the taxes paid, which were $32 a year. I borrowed my cousin's pickup, threw a mattress in the back, and went looking for quiet. The cabin sat on a side ridge where the mail never came. You had to park at a wide spot in the fire road and walk the last quarter-mile on a path so old it had grass growing down the middle. The house itself was hand-hewn chestnut logs, mostly gray now, with a stone chimney cracked clean through and a dog trot porch running the length of the front. The door was unlatched and a corn shuck broom leaned against the jamb, like the lady of the house had just stepped out to fetch water and never came back. Inside smelled of dust and sweet fern and something faintly floral, like funeral parlor flowers left too long. 2 rooms, one with a fireplace and a built-in bunk, the other a kitchen with a dry sink and a cook stove that still had a dented percolator on the back burner. I swept the worst of the mess out the door, unrolled my mattress on the puncheon floor, and figured I'd found Eden. First week was nothing but birds and heat lightning. I'd walk the old logging traces at dusk, picking blackberries till my fingers were purple, then sit on the porch listening to the night settle. The floor inside was thick with dust, so fine it hung in the air like smoke when you walked. You could write your name in it and it would stay for days. I never bothered sweeping. I was only one boy and the dust didn't hurt anything. Then the nights got strange. I sleep light in new places, always have. Around 2 in the morning, I'd come half awake to the softest sound, like someone dragging a broom real gentle across the floorboards. Shh, shh, shh. Slow, patient, the way my mama used to sweep the porch every evening, whether it needed it or not. I'd sit up and reach for the flashlight I kept by the mattress, click it on, and the sound would stop dead. The room would be empty, moonlight spilling through the chinks and silver bars across the floor. But right where I'd been lying, there'd be a perfect circle swept clean, edges sharp as if done with a ruler, dust pushed back in soft ridges all around it.
The planks in that circle shone pale, almost wet-looking in the moonlight. I'd stare at it till my eyes burned, then lie back down and listen to the quiet try to swallow me. It happened 3 nights running. 4th night, I left the flashlight on, clicked off, and pretended to sleep. I lay there with my eyes slitted, breathing slow, waiting. The heat was stifling. Sweat stuck my t-shirt to my back. 2 o'clock came and went on the wind-up alarm clock I'd found in a drawer. Then the sweeping started, soft as breath. Shh, shh, shh. I kept still as death. The sound moved across the floor toward me, paused, and began circling the mattress. I could see the dust lifting in tiny clouds, swirling in the moon bars like slow smoke. Round and round it went, tighter each pass, until the broom was sweeping the exact outline of my body. The air got colder right above me, like winter had crawled in through the cracks and crouched there. I smelled lavender water and coal oil and something underneath like old woman's skin. My heart was hammering so loud I was scared it would hear it. I must have dozed, because when I jerked awake, the circle was finished, clean as a plate, and the broom was back leaning by the door where I first saw it. I laid there till the roosters started down in the valley, afraid to put a foot outside that circle in case the dust had become something else. After that, I tried everything. I sprinkled salt, I burned sage I bought at the hippie store in Floyd. I even dragged the mattress out to the porch one night and slept under the stars. The sweeping followed me. I'd wake to find the porch board swept clean in a rectangle the exact size of the mattress. Bristles of the broom worn a little shorter each time. The smell of lavender got stronger, mixed with something sour now, like milk left in a cellar. One night in late August, the heat finally broke. A cool front came through and the air turned sharp, the way summer gives up. I'd been drinking a little warm beer to steady my nerves and fell into a hard sleep. The sweeping woke me, but this time it didn't stop when I opened my eyes. I lay rigid and watched. The broom was moving by itself, 6 feet from the doorway, sweeping slow across the floor toward me. Dust rose in front of it like a bow wave. And behind the broom, barely there, was the shape of a woman. Tall, thin, dressed in a long pale dress that hung off shoulders sharp as coat hangers. Her head was bent over the handle the way old women do when their backs are gone. Moonlight poured through her like water through a sieve. I could see the wall behind her ribs. Each stroke of the broom made her thinner, as if the work was using her up. She swept closer and closer, following the same circle she traced a dozen times before. But now the circle was shrinking, pulling tight around the mattress. The bristles scratched softer and softer until the sound was just a whisper, like someone trying to hush a crying child. I wanted to scream, but my throat had dried shut. She reached the edge of the mattress and kept going, sweeping right across where my legs lay, the broom passing through the blanket like it wasn't there. Cold went straight to the bone. I smelled her stronger than ever, lavender and sickness and the sweet rot of old ladies who died in their beds and weren't found for weeks. The shape got fainter with every stroke until there was almost nothing left but the motion of the broom and the soft shh. Like breathing through a mouthful of dust. Then the broom stopped. It stood straight up for a second, handle pointing at the roof, and fell over with a clatter that sounded loud as a gunshot in the quiet. The woman was gone. The circle around my mattress was swept so clean, the knots in the pine glowed like eyes. In the middle of that circle, right over my chest, lay a single gray hair, long and fine, curled like a question mark. I left before dawn, took nothing but the clothes on my back and the keys to the borrowed truck. Drove down the mountain doing 60 on a road that wasn't made for 20. Never looked in the rear view till I hit the Parkway. Years later, when Uncle Vernon passed, the family finally sold the land to the Park Service. They sent a crew up to burn the old cabins that weren't historic. I read the report. When they got to mine, the place was already swept clean, floorboards shining, not a speck of dust anywhere. The only thing they found was the broom, worn down to a nub, leaning by the door like it was waiting for someone to come back and finish the job. Some nights when the house is quiet and the kids are asleep, I still smell lavender water faint on the air. And I know if I went back up that ridge today, I'd find the floor waiting, dust thick and patient, ready for her to start again, right where she left off, sweeping a circle just the size of a grown man who never learned how to stay gone.
I was 23 and drowning in student loans when I found the cabin. A lady at the Methodist church in Meadows-a-Dan said her husband's uncle had died without heirs, and the place was just sitting empty up a dirt track off Charity Highway. Ain't much, she told me, but the roof don't leak bad and the mice are polite. Rent was $50 a month, cash in an envelope under a certain rock by the mailbox. I was taking night classes at the community college in Stewart and working days at the Dollar General, so I moved in the first week of February with everything I owned in the back of a borrowed Civic. The cabin was one room in a lean-to kitchen, built sometime before the Great War by somebody who measured with a stick and a prayer. Walls were poplar logs chinked with yellow newspaper, floorboards wide enough to lose a dime between. A little porch no bigger than a prayer rug hung off the front, 3 steps leading down into a sea of broom sedge and laurel. The first night I swept 40 years of dirt out the door and felt like I'd won something. I bought a hot plate, a second-hand futon, and a bag of cheap coffee and told myself I was getting ahead. Spring came slow that year. The mountains hold the cold like a grudge. Evenings I'd sit on the top step with a bowl of ramen, watching the last light bleed out behind Poor Mountain. Raccoons got bold quick, waddling right up to me with their little robber faces. After a few nights, I started leaving something for them. A couple saltines, the end of a bologna stick, half a honey bun. They'd wait in the weeds till I went inside, then scoot in and clean the step like it was they do. I got to where I'd talk to them soft, call them my dinner guests. It was the closest thing to company I had. One morning in April, I opened the door and the step was bare, except for one thing. A single baby tooth, lying dead center, still wet with blood at the root. Small, milky, perfect. I picked it up with 2 fingers like it might bite me. No coons in sight, no crows, nothing. Just a tooth and a single bare footprint in the soft dirt beside the bottom step. Child-sized, but the toes too long, too thin, like fingers trying to be feet. I should have thrown the tooth in the woods and forgot it. Instead, I wrapped it in a tissue and stuck it in the coffee can with my spare change. Told myself some kid from the hollow lost it and a fox carried it up here. That was the first lie I let myself swallow. Next night, I left nothing. Sat inside with the lights off and watched through the screen. Nothing came. I went to bed feeling proud, like I'd drawn a line. Woke at 3 to the softest knocking you ever heard. 3 taps, pause, 3 taps, like a child raised right. I laid there stiff till the birds started, then cracked the door at gray dawn. 37 teeth waited in 3 straight rows, sorted by size, all human. Some yellowed with age, some shining new, every one clean and bright as if they'd been polished. The footprint was back, deeper this time, pressed right up against the bottom step like whatever made it had stood there a long time, arranging. I swept them into a Walmart bag with the broom handle, not touching a one, and carried the bag 2 miles down the mountain and buried it under a rock slide. Hands shook so bad I dropped the shovel twice. When I got back, the porch was clean again, not a speck, like I dreamed it. But the smell lingered, coppery sweet, like the inside of a mouth. I quit leaving food after that, quit sitting on the step, kept the door locked and a kitchen knife under my pillow, like that would help. The knocking came every night now, same 3 and 3, patient as dead. Some nights it moved to the side window, tiny knuckles on glass. Some nights it was the back door, soft as breath. I never answered. I'd lay in the dark counting heartbeats till the sound gave up and the woods took it back. The gifts changed. A knotted lock of black hair tied with red yarn. A river pebble worn into the shape of an eye.
Once a Polaroid of the porch taken from the weeds, my own boot prints plain in the mud, but the picture was wet, like it had been carried in somebody's mouth. I burned them all in the stove, and the smoke hung blue in the room for hours, thick as guilt. May warmed up. The laurel bloomed, and the smell of it came through the cracks like a lie about safety. I was failing algebra and sleeping maybe 2 hours a night. One Thursday, I came home from class after 10, and the door stood open 2 inches. Always, always. I eased up with the tire iron from the car and pushed it wider. The coffee can lay overturned on the table, spare change scattered. Every tooth I'd buried was lined up along the windowsill in order of size, biggest to smallest, like a tiny white fence. The baby tooth that started it all sat in the middle, still flecked with that same dark root blood that never quite dried. I slept in the Civic that night with the engine running and the doors locked. Drove to campus Friday morning running on fumes and fear. When classes let out, I went to the library and looked up missing children in Patrick and Floyd counties. Too many. Always too many. I never spent another night in that cabin. Loaded what I could carry into the car before dark and left the key under a rock with $3.50s I couldn't afford. The church lady never asked why. She just said, "Some places take more than money, sugar," and looked at me like she was counting what was left of me. I still drive past the turnoff sometimes when I go home to see Mama. The track's grown up in Joe Pye weed and blackberry, but I know it's there. Some evenings when the sun sits low and the shadows stretch long across the road, I slow down just enough to see the porch roof through the leaves. And once, Lord forgive me for looking, once I saw 'em. Little pale shapes sitting on my steps, legs swinging, waiting polite, with their hands folded in their laps. Dozens of them, more every year. I always speed up then, but I know what they want. They want what I took from them, piece by small piece. And I know one of these days I'll be tired enough, broke enough, lonely enough to stop the car and walk up that track with a pocket full of saltines and a mouth full of sorry. Because hunger don't die when the body does. It just learns better manners.
They say poaching don't damn your soul near as much as pride does, and I reckon me and Luke learned that the hard way in November of 2014. The meat locker was empty, Mama's medicine was running low, and the game warden had been riding that stretch of the Blue Ridge Parkway like he had a personal grudge. So when Luke said he knew a tar paper shack the CCC boys built back in '41, tucked so deep in a laurel slick off milepost 180 that nobody'd been inside since Roosevelt was president, we loaded the rifles and a case of bush and told ourselves we'd be in and out in a week with a deer or two hanging. The cabin sat in a hollow where the sun forgot to shine. Roof patched with rusted tin and old road signs, walls black with creosote and age, one door hanging on leather hinges. Inside was a single room with 2 iron cots the army left behind, a potbelly stove that leaned like a drunk, and a floor of wide pine planks gone dark as tobacco spit. Smelled like wet dog and coal oil, even though the chimney was clogged with squirrel nests. We laughed about it, slapped each other on the back, said any ghost dumb enough to bother us would get turned into jerky, same as the deer. First 2 days were good. We glassed a little 4-point at dawn, dropped him clean, quartered him out back, and hung the meat in game bags from a sourwood tree. Nights we sat by the stove drinking warm beer and telling lies about women we never had. Luke slept like a dead man, always could. Me, I kept waking up to the sound of water dripping somewhere it shouldn't. Figured the roof was leaking, never found a wet spot. Third night the temperature dropped hard. Frost feathered the inside of the one grimy window, and the stove went out sometime after midnight. I came awake sudden, heart already running, with the feeling you get when somebody's staring at the back of your neck. The room was black dark, but I could hear Luke snoring soft on the other cot, and something else, wet footprints crossing the floor. Slow, deliberate, slap, pause, slap, pause, coming from the wall behind the stove, the one that faced the uphill side of the hollow.
I laid there froze, telling myself it was a coon or a possum got in somehow. Then the steps kept coming, straight across the planks toward my bunk. I could smell it then, cold creek water and something sour like old sweat. I reached under the pillow for the .357 I kept there and eased the hammer back. The walking stopped right at the edge of my cot. Water dripped steady, plink, plink, onto the floorboards beside my head. I could feel the air change, like something tall was leaning over me. My eyes started making out shapes in the dark. Long, narrow feet outlined in frost that hadn't been there before. Toes pointing at my face. Water still dripping from them even though the prints came out of a solid wall. The tracks went from the logs behind the stove, crossed the room in a straight line, and ended at my pillow. No prints leading away, just stopped, like whatever made them was still standing there. I don't know when I started holding my breath, felt like forever. Then Luke snorted in his sleep and rolled over, and the cold pulled back all at once. I laid there till a window went gray, pistol cocked in my hand, too scared to move. When the light finally came, the prints were gone. Floor was bone dry except for one dark spot right beside my cot, and the sheet under my head was soaked through with water cold enough to burn. I shook Luke awake and showed him. He looked at me like I'd lost my mind, said I must have pissed the bed. I let him think it. We didn't talk about it again. That day we hunted farther down the ridge than we meant to, stayed out till after dark just to keep moving. When we got back, the stove was lit, not banked, not smoldering, full fire going, coffee can on top boiling over. We hadn't left any wood inside. Luke's face went the color of hog lard. He grabbed his rifle and we walked a circle around the cabin with our flashlights. Nothing. No tracks in the leaves, no mud on the doorstep, no smell of smoke outside. Door was still latched from the inside with the piece of wire we used. We didn't sleep that night. Sat back to back on one cot with the guns across our knees, passing a jar of shine till a bottle was dry. Around 3 in the morning, the dripping started again. Same rhythm, same direction. I watched the floor this time, watched the frost crawl out of the wall like fingers, watched the wet prints appear one by one, slow as time, heading straight for me again. Luke saw him too. I felt him go stiff against my back. The tracks stopped at the same place. The mattress on my cot sagged in the middle like somebody heavy sat down. Water started dripping from the springs overhead, hitting my blanket in cold, steady drops. Luke whispered Jesus Christ under his breath, and the dripping quit. The weight lifted. We waited till sunrise with the barrels of our rifles pointed at nothing. Next morning we packed out, left the meat hanging, left the stove wide open, left the door swinging. Didn't speak the whole hike back to the truck. Luke threw his gear in the bed and said he was done hunting for the rest of his life. I thought he was being dramatic. 2 weeks later, he called me from his trailer in Tazewell, voice shaking so bad I could barely understand him. Said he woke up to water dripping on his face. Lived in a single wide with carpet, no leaks anywhere. Sheet under his head soaked through, same as mine. He moved 3 counties away after that, took a job in a coal mine, even though he swore he'd never go underground again. Won't answer when I call now. I still drive to Parkway sometimes, late, when the fog sits low in the hollers. I slow down around milepost 180 and look for that spur road, but the kudzu's grown over it so thick you'd never know it was there. Every now and then, when the rain sets in hard and the windshield wipers can't keep up, I smell cold creek water in the cab of the truck. Feel something tall standing behind my seat, breathing soft, waiting for me to pull over and come back to the hollow where the tracks never quite finish walking. I ain't stopped yet, but I keep a towel on the seat now, just in case one night the dripping starts and I'm too tired to drive any farther.
I never meant to go back up to milepost 176. I swore on everything holy and unholy that I wouldn't. But some places get their hooks in you deeper than family, deeper than fear, and they wait. They always wait. It started in the fall of 2003, the year my wife Ruth took the boys and left me standing in the yard with a duffel and a bottle of Evan Williams. She said I'd already been gone a long time, just hadn't bothered to pack. Maybe she was right. I'd been working road construction 12, 14 hours a day, coming home smelling of diesel and somebody else's cigarettes, sleeping in the recliner with the TV still talking to an empty room. After she drove away, I sat on the porch steps until the bottle was gone and the stars looked close enough to touch. Then I loaded the truck and headed west on the Parkway. No plan, except to keep the pedal down until the pain thinned out. I found the cabin by accident. A hand-painted sign nailed to a sweet gum tree said, "Cabin for rent, week or month, cash." An arrow pointed up a trace so narrow the mirrors scraped laurel. I followed it 2 miles until the road quit and a little board house sat in a clearing no bigger than a prayer rug. 1 room, tar paper roof, stovepipe leaning like it was tired. The owner was an old man with cloud cataracts who took my money without counting it and told me the spring was 50 yards down the back and the outhouse leaned but hadn't fallen yet. "Mind the quiet," he said, same as they all do, and then he was gone, tail lights swallowed by the dark. Inside smelled of coal oil and something sweeter, almost like apples left too long in a barrel. There was a cast iron cook stove, a table made from a single plank, and 1 straight chair that rocked on uneven legs. A narrow cot under the only window. A lantern hung from a ceiling joist on a piece of baling wire. That was it. No electricity, no phone, no neighbors closer than a hard day's walk. I told myself it was perfect. First week I did nothing but drink and sleep and stare at the walls until the grain in the boards started making faces. I'd wake up at odd hours tasting blood and know I'd been grinding my teeth again. The quiet was so complete I could hear my pulse in my ears like a drum nobody else was marching to. At night the mountains pressed in close and the trees talked in a language I almost understood. Then came the night I heard the stove lid rattle. I'd banked the fire good, same as always, and gone to bed sober for once because the liquor was gone. Woke up cold to the marrow and heard the lid lift and settle, like somebody was feeding the fire a stick at a time. I sat up slow, heart already running. The room was black except for the faint red glow through the stove's isinglass. I could see the chair rocking by itself, slow, patient, the way a man rocks when he's got all the time in the world. The lantern was lit, flame turned low, throwing yellow light across the table where a tin cup steamed like it had just been poured. I don't know how long I sat there frozen, long enough for the coffee smell to fill the room, rich and dark, the way Ruth used to make it before everything went sour. Long enough for the chair to stop rocking and the stove lid to go still. Then the cot creaked behind me, though I hadn't moved an inch, and something that weighed about what I did settled on the mattress at my back. I felt the heat of it through the quilt, smelled wet dog and coal oil and something underneath like turned earth after rain. It never spoke. It just breathed, slow and steady, matching mine, until I couldn't tell whose lungs were whose. I don't remember getting out of bed. I don't remember grabbing the axe or kicking the door wide. I only remember running barefoot down the mountain with Laurel tearing my arms and the taste of pennies in my mouth. I ran until my legs gave out, and I crawled the last mile to the truck, left the key in the cabin, left everything, clothes, wallet, wedding ring, because I knew if I went back for any of it, I'd never leave again. Drove down the Parkway in nothing but boxes and blood, crying like a child until the sun came up over Roanoke and burned the dark out of my eyes. I got my life back together piece by piece. New job pouring concrete in Greensboro. Met a quiet woman named Linda who didn't ask about the scars on my feet or why I flinched when somebody poured coffee too strong. We married in a courthouse, had a little girl with Ruth's eyes and my stubborn chin. I told myself the mountain had let me go. Told myself stories have endings if you're brave enough to walk away.
But the dream started the first winter we lived in the new house. I'd be walking up that laurel trace again, boots silent on the needles, knowing exactly how many steps until the clearing opened up. The cabin would be waiting, door standing open polite, lantern turned up bright, coffee bubbling on the stove. And there I'd be, sitting in my chair, rocking slow, wearing my skin like a coat that didn't quite fit anymore. The thing would turn its head when I stepped on the porch and smile with my mouth, only the teeth were too long and the eyes were black all the way through. It never spoke out loud. It didn't have to. I knew what it wanted. It wanted the rest of me, the part that walked away still breathing. I'd wake up gasping, tasting coal oil and wet dog, sheets soaked through with sweat even in January. Linda learned not to touch me when I came back from those dreams. She'd just wait on her side of the bed until my breathing slowed and the smell left the room. Years went by. The dreams came less often, but they never quit. Sometimes months would pass and I'd think I was free. Then I'd smell coffee brewing when nobody was in the kitchen, or hear that chair rocking on the pine floor we put down in '09. Once I found the front door of our house standing open 2 inches in the middle of the night, frost on the threshold shaped like bare feet walking in, not out. I started driving again, long hauls at night when the house felt too small. I'd take the Parkway just to prove I could, windows down, radio loud, telling myself I was only enjoying the view. But every time I passed milepost 176, my hands would lock on the wheel and the truck would slow like it had a mind of its own. I never stopped, not once. I'd floor it until the needle buried and the engine screamed, tears running cold on my cheeks. Last month, Linda found me in the garage at 3 in the morning packing a bag. She didn't ask where I was going. She just stood in the doorway with our little girl asleep on the shoulder and said, "If you leave this time, don't come back." I kissed them both and walked out anyway. I've been sleeping in roadside motels and truck stops ever since, afraid to close my eyes too long. Because the dreams have changed. Now when I walk up that trace, the cabin looks brand new, boards tight, roof straight, smoke curling friendly from the chimney. The thing in my chair stands up when I cross the threshold and opens its arms like a brother kept waiting too long. And I'm tired, Lord, how I'm tired. 20 years of running have worn me down to gristle and bone. Some nights when the wind smells like laurel and wood smoke, I can almost feel the chair under me, the heat of the stove on my shins, the weight of my own skin settling back where it belongs. I still got the truck pointed south, still got a full tank and a half bottle of something that burns. But I catch myself taking the Parkway more often, slowing down around the curves, watching for that little dirt trace nobody's kept clear in decades. I know one of these nights I'll be too weary to fight it. I'll turn the wheel left instead of right and follow the laurel home. I'll walk through that open door and hang the lantern on its wire and pour myself a cup of coffee that's been waiting 20 years to cool. And whatever's been wearing my skin will finally stand up out of the chair, stretch like a man waking from a long sleep, and smile with my mouth the right way this time. Because some debts don't care how far you run. Some cabins don't rent by the week or the month. They rent by the life. And mine's been overdue a long, long time.